A little bit about what we do, and then some thoughts on cultural diplomacy with regards to Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I hope I'll be a bit controversial because I'm going to deal with some issues that are in the news, and unfortunately we don't hear some of the voices that I think ought to be heard. So what I do at the Atlas Network is we work with about 400 public policy research institutes around the world. They're in 83 different countries, groups that are trying to improve public policy in their own countries, in their own contexts. We also have our own programs in 14 different languages, and so I have the great pleasure of working with highly educated people who are native speakers of Arabic, Persian, Vietnamese, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, and a number of other languages. And that brings me then to the question of Afghanistan and Pakistan. I do work in both countries. I spend a fair amount of time in each. I should caution, I'm not a native speaker of Urdu or Dari or Pashto. I can barely get by with polite conversation and words like thank you and nice to meet you and so on. I work with colleagues, however, who are competent in those languages. When I travel there, I don't do it on a State Department invitation. I go as a private person, so I don't go with a lot of security and all that sort of thing, which normally isolates you from contact with normal sorts of people. People I know who travel there for the World Bank or the State Department and other institutions typically have several bubbles around them. And it's very, very difficult for most people to have any contact with them. So they travel in a bubble. I usually just get in a beat-up old car and drive around. And that's a good thing because when you don't have a high security profile, you're less likely to be assaulted by someone also. So there's this trade-off between high security means high profile, low security also means low profile. And fortunately, when I dress in Afghan clothes, I normally dress in indigenous clothes when I'm over there, I look like a Nuristani. And the Nuristanis are known for being particularly tough, and people don't mess with them. So that is a small advantage that I have. I was stopped at a checkpoint once outside of Kabul, and I don't speak, obviously because I can't speak Dari. So my colleagues always just say, just be silent and look stern. And the policeman came over with the AK-47, and I rolled down the window. And then over came the sergeant. You could tell he was a sergeant because he had a rather large storage capacity with him. And he came and pushed him to the side and said in very colorful language, don't mess with these people, they're Nuristanis. So we were able to go on, and that was a slight advantage. Afghanistan is also, as many people don't know, a remarkably heterogeneous society. You find an enormous diversity, not only of languages, but also of religion, of ethnic characteristics, racial characteristics, and so on. The first time I went there, I was actually a little bit surprised to see the enormous range of color tones in the population and the different ethnicities. I've been in Afghanistan in Kabul, Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, Panjshir, and other regions, and then in my trips to Pakistan, Lahore, Islamabad, and Karachi. So here are just a few thoughts that I've written down that I thought I would share with you. And the first point is to recognize and understand that people live normal lives in those countries. It is not just a matter of violence. When we turn on the television or open the newspapers, what we see is an explosion, a murder, some terrible, shocking act of violence. And it's very natural to think that's just the normal life. But actually it isn't. There are millions and millions of people going about their lives. They go to school, they go to work, they go to the mosque, they visit their friends, they go out to have tea. They live normal lives. That is the normal life there. Unfortunately, of course, it is punctuated more frequently by acts of violence than it would be in Ohio or someplace like that. I'll leave out Chicago, which would be somewhat closer in terms of the violence levels, but most places in North America, Western Europe. So they do have greater experiences of violence, and it's had a deep impact on their culture and on life. But everyday life continues. We are human beings. We continue to do what we want to do. The other point is that the Talibs, or Taliban, the students, is it the name of this movement, they don't actually hate the West. I don't think that they hate me. I don't think that they hate you. Most of them, when I'm talking about the vast majority of the members, not the leadership, but the members, are illiterate. They're not very worldly. If you pointed to a map of the planet and asked them to find where New York is or some other city, many of them would be very challenged to be able to identify it. They're rather like American students being asked to identify cities in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And they don't hate our values. They don't stew in resentment over us. Rather, as was explained to me when I was driving once through the countryside by an Afghan professor, and I asked him, I said, are you armed? Because typically I go with people who carry firearms. He said, oh, I'm not. And I said, oh, what happens if we're stopped by Taliban? He said, I will tell them the name of my father. And it would be very rude for them to kidnap or kill a guest of my father. That made me feel better. He said, however, if they're foreigners, that won't work. But local Afghans, they respect their elders and the traditions in their communities. He said, but don't worry, in this village we're driving through now, they don't have Taliban, they have warlords. That didn't make me actually feel a lot more confident. But he said the warlords keep away the Taliban, and they do their business in trafficking in illegal forged identification, narcotics, and firearms. But he said, you know, he spends time talking to the local Taliban, and he said, they don't know where New York is. Here's what they're told. They are told by leaders that foreigners have invaded their country, that they are there to rape their wives and to destroy their religion and take their land. And here's $50 to go fight them on the weekend. And $50 is a lot of money. And so, for $50, they will go fight the foreigners whom they are told are there to rape their wives and take their land and destroy their religion. I don't think that's an accurate description of what NATO or ISAF is trying to do. We can set aside what they are trying to do, which I think is incoherent and unlikely to succeed. But I don't think that they're there to rape Afghan women, take their land, and destroy their religion. But that's what these people are told, and they really don't know much different, and it's not easy for many of them to check it against some other kind of evidence or argument. Remember that the majority of them are illiterate. They don't read the newspapers because they can't read. They don't know what is in their holy book, so they rely on someone else to tell them what's in it. And in fact, when they're told that a good Muslim has to have a beard, you can't be a Muslim without having a beard. So the learned Imam, by that standard, would not be a Muslim because he doesn't have a big beard. And so they assault and murder Hazaras, who are also Muslims, and Hazara men generally don't have beards because they're descendants of Mongols. So consequently, they have just a few hairs on their chin. This is not a sign of even Islamic radicalism. This is just a sign of ignorance. These people they don't even understand the teachings, the central teachings of the religion that they profess. But they're told by someone who's powerful that that's what it means. So the fact of the matter is that they don't pose a threat to the United States. They're not a threat to Europe. They're not a threat, frankly, to anyone other than their immediate neighbors. And of course, they can be very dangerous, but that is a problem of local security. Just to be very honest, they are not a threat to the United States of America. Their leaders may be motivated by a very hateful ideology. I won't say religion, I'll say ideology. They are motivated to deceive other people and to induce them to commit terrible, horrible, violent acts. But those people are not, in fact, engaged in a so-called jihad against the West or against the United States. And that's something that needs to be understood. These become international issues to the extent foreign powers make them international issues, but in their own perspective, they just aren't. The next point is we can ask, where do the Taliban get the money? Where does the leadership get the $50 to give to an illiterate, ignorant peasant, along with a AK-47? The current price of Chinese AK-47s is about $2,000, I discovered when I tried to buy one in the Kabul gun market. Where do they get all that money? They get it from us. It all comes from here. And here's an issue that I hope will be a little bit provocative, but I think it needs to be said. It's the U.S. war on drugs that funds the Taliban. That's where all the money comes from. It's the fact that there's an illegal market here, and there's a demand. Where there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. They're going to meet someplace. The consequence is that you get special rents, as we say in economic jargon, or profits, due to your willingness to engage in illegal, dangerous behavior. So what is it that drives violent crime in the United States? Best estimates are about 2/3 of violent crime are because of our war on drugs. That's why Chicago is a battlefield. It's because of our social policies. When Prohibition was enacted against alcohol in the United States, the murder rate rose every single year until it was legalized, and then it fell for 11 consecutive years, right? We would see the same thing if we were to legalize narcotics. But our war on drugs here in the United States is piling up bodies. The bodies are piled up in Chicago, but typically among minority young men. They don't get on the newspapers as much or on the front page, but that's the body count. But then the other bodies are piling up in Mexico, over 60,000 people killed by drug gangs and drug cartels because of our war on drugs. I was in Colombia about a month ago. People can tell you there about how FARC is funded. It's funded 100% by drug money. And the drug money comes because it's illegal in the United States. And exactly the same thing happens in Afghanistan. Now this is a very delicate topic. And I met with members of the Afghan National Assembly and 2 members of the Senate of Afghanistan who have raised this question and said, our country is torn to pieces by your drug laws. That is the consequence of your drug laws, is huge, huge profits for drug traffickers in our country. What are you going to do about it? And the answer is, we're just going to continue the same policy. 2 senators who proposed allowing Afghans to produce opiates legally for the world market, because they said it's being grown here. Just fly over the country. You see the poppy fields. You know it. Let them grow it for the legal market. There is a legal market for opiates. It's needed for surgery and for pain killing and so on. It's grown someplace. What's grown in Switzerland legally for the world market? Let our farmers produce for that market. They will make 5 times as much money as they make now when they sell to the traffickers, and the traffickers' profits will disappear if it's a legal market. The U.S. ambassador's response, this conversation is over. They don't want to hear. They don't want to hear it. But the fact of the matter is, we could dry up the funds for the Taliban very quickly. I won't say overnight, I'll say in a month, if we were to legalize narcotics in this country. But instead, we are paying for the Taliban and we're paying for the soldiers who fight them. Both of those are in effect funded by our policies. Afghanistan, and then the spillover into Pakistan, has been suffering from over 30 years of war. So just try to imagine what that would look like in your country. Imagine 30 years of pitched battles and constant warfare, and the destruction is terrible. The physical destruction, although there's some good news, you see in Kabul and Mazar and elsewhere, people are building new buildings again, including glass, which is a sign of some feeling there's security in the future when you build buildings that have glass walls. But the fact of the matter is that their cultures were seriously damaged, especially in Afghanistan. The majority of the population there are the descendants of the people who were illiterate and poor and had no place to go. The middle classes were wiped out. They were wiped out by the communists first. They executed the intellectuals. They went door to door in villages and pulled you out and looked at your libraries. And if they found Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin, that was okay. If they found Montesquieu, if they found Al-Ghazali, if they found Ibn Rushd, if they found those people, whether they were Muslim or Christian, if they found enlightened thinkers, they executed you in the garden. So a very good dear friend of mine, his vivid memories of being 9 years old when the communists took over in the country and going out with his father, who was a very learned man, who was later killed, going out with him and burning all of their books. They burned all of them. Why? So that when the communist militia came, they would have no books to incriminate them that they were not good communists. And then the war against the Soviet invasion, which came after this, the war against them, then the civil war, the Taliban regime, and then the current situation. It's really a horror. And it means that their culture was savagely assaulted at a very deep, profound level. And it will take time to recover. Literacy is one of the most important elements of this, and it is rising, so there is good news. Young children are being taught to read and write, so that's cause for hope. But still about 35% of the population could read at a pretty basic level. And the numbers who could read a sophisticated, serious book is much smaller than that, probably, hard to say, about 10%. One of the things that they need to bring about this revival, again focusing on Afghanistan, but it has some implications for at least the tribal regions of Pakistan, is a functioning market economy. And here I think also that U.S. public diplomacy and public policy is hindering that. The huge flows of aid are staggeringly corrupting of that society. The amounts of money are unimaginable for most of us. And there's a reason why actual pallets, large stacks of $100 bills are flown out of Kabul into Dubai. They actually shrink wrap them in plastic. You have never seen so much money in your life, stacked up $100 bills. And that is actually what fueled the Dubai property boom, was our foreign aid money flowing into that country. This distorts the economy quite dramatically. It's very difficult to have normal economic development when so much aid money is flowing into the country and it is corrupting the entire political class. You'll sometimes meet someone who's a senator or a legal advisor, and people will say almost with awe, they will say, this man was in a very powerful position for 3 years, and he's not rich. The expectation was 3 years in power, you would have ended up fabulously rich. And so people will say with a certain awe that this man held an office, and at the end of it, as far as we can tell, he was not richer than at the beginning. That's a sign of honor, but it's also the sign of the immense corruption caused by our policies. So what should we do? Well, I think the first thing, I won't talk so much about public or cultural diplomacy, but public diplomacy, is stop doing some of the things that we're doing. It turns out, I know this is shocking to many people, when you bomb other people, they don't like you. This seems a tremendous surprise to many, but when you blow them up, they don't like you. And maybe we should stop killing people with drone missiles. Maybe we should think about that policy. There are people who support it in the country. It is true they don't indiscriminately assault people. I think that the president does target really bad people. The problem is those bad people are in a building with a lot of other people around them who aren't bad. And quite often those people are the collateral damage. And you can imagine that every time you do that and you kill someone's 7-year-old daughter, you've just made an enemy for life. These people are not going to respect that. So I think that we should begin to more seriously think about disengagement militarily from those regions, disengaging from the Pakistani regime. It is frankly impossible to work with the government of Pakistan because there is no one government of Pakistan. There are several. There are several governments of Pakistan, and they have different policies. And they are at war with each other. So are you dealing with the military or with the ISI, which has a different policy from the military, or are you dealing with the elected government, which has a different policy from the other two? And it seems that the American authorities don't actually understand that. I'm just staggered by how ignorant they seem to be. They don't understand that Pakistan is not like Canada. If you sit down with the Canadian foreign minister, the Canadian foreign minister tells you what the Canadian government's policy will be. You don't have to worry that the Canadian Air Force is going to undermine it. Right? But the Americans, I just don't think they even understand that. And that's just surprising to people who are professionally focused on these matters. I think we'd be better off if our government simply disengaged and just said, we are not going to be concerned about what happens in Pakistan, except insofar as they may be a threat to us. And what happens in Waziristan, quite frankly, is not a threat to us. It may be terrible things, but they are not a threat to the United States of America. And similarly, those Taliban in Kandahar who take up weapons to fight on the weekend are not really a threat to the United States. We have created a system in which we've installed a policy that causes us to realize something else is a threat and take them on. Something else is a threat to our policy doing that, and you get stuck in this policy. So why is it that we're bombing the tribal regions? Because the tribe of Pakistan, because the tribal regions of Pakistan are refuge for people firing at American troops in Afghanistan. Maybe if we didn't have so many troops in Afghanistan, they wouldn't be doing that. It's just a thought that I would suggest for our leaders. What could we do on the level of cultural diplomacy, though? What would be positive? First, stop doing things that are harmful. And second, we could do some things that are positive. And I'll mention a couple. One is it's become extremely difficult for people from those countries to get visas to the United States. And I think this is a mistake. We have adopted an extremely conservative, and I don't mean in a political sense, but a conservative attitude that's overly risk averse towards people from those countries. And the reason is the CYA policy of every bureaucrat. It's a mixed audience, so I'll be gentle in my term. It's cover your, it could be CYP, posterior, right? Cover your posterior. No one in the Department of Homeland Security or Immigration wants to be the one who's pointed at and said, you issued a visa to Osama bin Laden. Nobody wants to be that person. And the consequence is they are so risk averse. It's extreme. And that means that people who just want to come here to study, to learn, find it extremely difficult to get visas. This is true of those two countries, but actually increasingly of the world. The United States is isolating itself. It's so difficult for foreigners to come and visit this country now. And they are subject to such humiliation by our government. And I think this is highly, highly counterproductive. It's also important for our leaders to shut up. They should just shut up. When they talk, and I find it just so embarrassing, and explain to other people their own culture and religion, it's embarrassing. And everybody sees through it, whether it's President Obama or President Bush standing up and lecturing other people on what Islam means. Well, I'm not a Muslim, so I listen to Muslims who explain their philosophy, and I realize there's a wide spectrum. There are people who are going to disagree with the learned imam, sometimes very, very vociferously. That's a discussion among Muslims about what their religion means. I don't go around telling other people what their religion means. I just think it's arrogant. I don't go into a Roman Catholic service and say, stop, you got it wrong. Let me explain what St. Augustine really meant here, or what are the real teachings of the church. And I don't think that those preachings are well received in those countries. I mean, I've just sat with people who they just laugh when they hear non-Muslim American political leaders, or German or French or others, explaining piously what their religion really means and giving bad renditions of stories from the Hadith or from other elements of Islamic scripture. So I just think they should just shut up and just show respect by saying, I respect you, I respect your right to religion, whatever it happens to be, and I'm willing to listen to you tell me what it means. But do not presume to walk up to them and tell them what their religion means. I think that we should engage in more trade, and this is an area where the United States, I think, could do a better job. Trade is one of the best forms of cultural diplomacy, when people actually engage on the basis of mutual benefit, whether it's buying and selling rice, or manufactured goods, or cloth, or anything else. People meet and they exchange the handships of peace and commerce. And that's an area where the United States could do a much better job to open up more trade opportunities and more opportunities for investment as well. So with that, I'm going to cut myself off. I hope I've been at least a little bit provocative, and I look forward to your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palmer.